Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's CJ. I want to welcome you guys back. This is episode 23 of the JBJ 65-gallon reef build. This episode's been a long time coming. We're finally going to get all the corals mounted in the JBJ. For those that can see, tons of different colors, tons of candy all over the tank, but a lot of it is not in its permanent locations. And after I had a chance to move some things around, I have a good idea of where I'm going to put these corals. Now, the frag rack that you guys may have noticed was here before in the last update. I have shifted it around different places because that's part of my thought process when I'm trying to plan out my coral placement and the color scheme and the layout of the tank. So right now, they're up here just chilling out. We've got a bunch of frags on the overhang here that we need to get mounted, and overall, just trying to get everything in its semi-permanent location and hopefully prevent me from putting my hands in the tank again. So this video is going to just kind of be a walkthrough on what my thought process is. Not really here to teach anyone. As you guys know, it's not the purpose of my channel. I'm just here to bring you guys along. You guys are passengers in the journey, but I'm going to show you everything I've learned up to this point with SPS, LPS, lighting, flow requirements, a bunch of different things that you may want to consider if you're going to start trying to mount corals in your tank. So if you're new to the hobby, hey, this may be a great video for you. For those that already know these things, maybe you may pick up a tip or two that you may not have used before, and you can incorporate it. Now, as you guys know, I am still running the Radeon XR15 Gen 4 Pros. Don't have plans on upgrading to the G5s. I got reasons for that, but we'll discuss that in a future video. But for now, I just want to make sure I mention this because running all blues is essential for me with mounting my corals. A lot of people don't consider this, but you got to think about it. You're viewing your tank underneath multiple conditions. You're viewing it underneath white lights. You're also going to view it underneath blue lights, especially at nighttime and different things. And all your corals react differently to different light. Some corals look good in day, and other corals look good at night, meaning they're fluorescent. So you don't want to overlook the fluorescing corals when you're mounting them, when you're spacing them out in the tank. And the only way to do that is under blue light. So what I would suggest, running all blues, grab your pair of those orange glasses you can put on that'll make all the fluorescence pop. That way you can see it just like the camera lens is showing you right now. And that really goes a long way for you spacing out the fluorescent corals evenly. Last thing you want to do is mount all your corals during the daytime. Everything looks good, and turn the lights out, turn your blues on, and the next thing you know, only corals are glowing on this side of the tank and nothing else anywhere else. During the day, everything looks cool, but at night, you're going to really notice how you might have kind of misstepped or misplaced some corals. So make sure I mention that. Blue lighting is essential for mounting the corals, definitely for me. So figured I'd give you guys that quick tip. So I'm gonna give you guys a quick look at my tools of choice when it comes to mounting frags. Of course, gotta keep you some good old latex gloves. It doesn't matter the kind, just make sure that they're near right. The exam gloves, not the ones that have powder in them or anything that's gonna come off in your tank. The black gloves normally work well. I got some blue ones in here. I just try to keep a stockpile of these because I hate the thought of touching corals and either passing something to them they don't want, or even worse, leaving that residue on your hands. If anyone's handled corals barehanded, if you don't believe me, smell your hands after handling the corals. You have that sweet, toxic smell, whatever that smell is, that the whatever is coming off the corals stays on your hands. It doesn't matter, even if you wash your hands, you're still gonna have that feeling and that smell on there. And that's not something you can go and, touch some corals and go eat some chicken. You know what I'm saying? So I want to be able to eat chicken after touching my corals. So gloves is essential for that. Now, as far as the corals themselves, have a handy dandy frag kit I purchased from BRS years ago. A simple kit, includes everything you need. Got the bone cutters in here. We got some forceps. We got some scissors. Got a little whatever tool I use for that. I don't know what that's called, but I normally use this to break up my super glue. I'll show you that a little later. Now, as far as mounting the corals, tools of choice, it's going to be super glue. Now, this is going to be the ultra thick glue by BRS. I like the ultra thick because it doesn't run and it's really, really tacky. It's very similar to like the Gorilla Glue or the super glue you can get in the LFS or at the hardware store, whatever the case may be. One thing I will suggest is sticking with the tubes, so that way you can get the maximum out of it. meaning as you use it, you can keep rolling the tube up, squeezing it, getting all the glue out of it. What I found is using the bottles, normally you can't get all of it out. At least for me, you never get all the glue out of the bottle. You don't get your money's worth out of it. So this is going to be what I use primarily for mounting my frags. But for the heavy duty stuff, trying something new that I've never tried before. I had this stuff for years, honestly, haven't used it yet. This is going to be the Reef welder. This is like the epoxy or the putty that you can purchase that you knead together and activate it. Those are going to be my main essentials. You know, a little bucket for working in to catch any leftover pieces of frags or plugs or whatever the case may be. So this is going to be the essentials for me for getting started with getting the corals mounted. Now, before we get going too far, I'm going to rewind time back just a tad bit and answer a question I received a lot, meaning, where did you get your first corals from? You know, what the hell are all those zoanthus and pallies in the JBJ? Well, I never covered it. They actually came from Lazy's Coral House. Now, I can't remember all the different names of these corals, but I will include an inventory of this shipment down in the description if you're interested in tracking down to see which one is which, or you can just swing by his website, Lazy's Coral House, and put an order in. And on top of that, if you guys are really interested, you can take advantage of a discount code. It's CJ-Aquarium. It'll get you guys 10% off. Now, this is not the first time I've received corals from Lazy Coral House. I actually got a first pack in the 120 gallon. Definitely tons of fire as far as these zoanthus and pallies, great space fillers. Now for me, these were some of the first additions because they're also easier to keep corals. You know, the goal was to slowly start stocking the JBJ with different types of corals that I believe would actually do well. And considering the tank was still going through, you know, some growing pains and cycling issues and, you know, starting to mature, I did not want to dive straight into the higher end, you know, SPS and all those kind of things. So what better way to start off a completely, you know, blank landscape as far as the aquascape than a little piece of the fire. So as I mentioned before, mounting these corals underneath blue lights made things so much easier as far as trying to space them out and trying to have it make sense as far as the color scheme, and also trying to predict where I'm actually gonna put other corals in the future. The last thing I wanted to do was put some encrusting or, you know, pallies or something in a high priority spot, or, you know, prime real estate as far as SPS corals or a different kind of coral I had plans on later down the line. Goal was just get these guys spread out in the tank, get them established, get them growing, and give me that first bit of splash of color in the JBJ. Now, ultimately, some of the places I decided to put these corals ended up not being the best place, but as part of, you know, mounting corals, seeing how they react, observing them, if they're not happy, being able to move them later. So when I figured I'd give you guys a quick look of how the tank looked a few months ago. This is actually back in December, just the beginnings of the JBJ, but we definitely have come a long way since this point.
So okay. It's actually good that he's got that piece of rubble.
He's holding on too.
Yeah, keep some of this foot protected. Now I don't think we have any to sell, but I'd have to ask Alex. We have these over here, and so you would put the clam in this, and you put the sand over the top of it.
Right.
And so it would put its foot here, but the bristle ones wouldn't be able to get to it.
Right.
Because its clam body would.
And it's like a good thing to keep it stabilized too from falling over. So okay. You know, this is one of the best things about strolling into your local LFS. You never know what you're gonna see, and you never know what's still gonna be there every time you come back in the store. And it was this one clam that just was talking to me. He was like, "Hey, CJ, I know you didn't have luck with one of us in the 120, but the JBJ has the perfect spot for me. Take me home." So as you guys figured it out, I could not resist getting this clam to bring it to the JBJ. I really was excited to have this splash of color. You know, clams provide a few services besides looking good. They also are filter feeders, and they definitely do a great job of, you know, just keeping your tank on track. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to pick this guy up. And the second reason is just trying something new. I didn't have success the first time, so I wanted to go ahead and give it another try and see if this JBJ can help me overcome all the hurdles in the past and all the things I failed doing in the past. And here we go. Judgment Day has finally arrived for the JBJ. And by Judgment Day, I mean finally getting in here and mounting all the new SPS, and then remounting and moving a few corals around that I've been looking at and just knowing they were not in the right place. So, you know, some of these corals have reacted great to the spot they're in, some not so much. Some I've looked at and, they may have started to look like they were gonna grow, but it's now or never to get them moved. So as all of those situations are going on simultaneously in my head, as I sit back and look at the tank and also remember just how far we've come in the JBJ, almost a year old. I think next month is going to be the 1 year anniversary. I'm going to put together a video of, explaining my 1 year review of everything. But for now, it's just great being able to enjoy the tank. I mean, we've overcome a lot in a short amount of time. Over the last few months, dealing with the dinoflagellate outbreak, dealing with the hair algae issue that I purposely created to beat the dinos. And then last but not least, getting corals in the system that I've never kept before, and so far are doing great. So, it's just never a bad idea to sit back and just reflect, thinking about what you've been through and thinking about the future plans that are to come. So let's go ahead and get to it. And here we go, guys. Got the frag rack raised up just above the water level so I can handle these corals easier. And man, I'm telling you, look at the color. This is ridiculous, isn't it? The corals are outside of the water and they are still crazy color, crazy bright. Just look at it, man. Just look at that PC rainbow. Craziness, right? But the point I'm trying to make for you really quick is going to be how we're going to handle the plugs on the corals. As you guys can see, some of the corals have begun encrusting on the plugs, some more than others, and some have not really started encrusting at all. So like the Setosa coral, it's going to be a prime example of a coral that we probably are going to take off the plug, meaning it hasn't really set a base down. There's not really going to be that much of a risk as far as removing this coral and getting it straight to the rock work. So this will be the first one that we remove. Probably this one. Also, the melee looks like it's not as encrusted, but a coral like this shock tart, completely encrusted over the plug. So this is going to be a coral that we're going to leave on the plug and probably just snip off the bottom of it. So I know it's a 50-50 thing. If I asked people how they wanted to do this, a lot of people say they leave the plugs on there. Some people say they don't. At the end of the day, the coral will grow over it and encrust over it. It's just about how you want the tank to look aesthetically. And also, if you want to be able to move these corals later, meaning if they're encrusted on the plug, gives you more time if you decided to change your mind before they actually lay the base down on the rock work, or later down the line, if you wanted to remove the coral, you can take your bone cutters and focus on where the plug is and break that whole colony off. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, but for me, I've always been a fan of, the least amount of frag plugs in the tank, so that's the route I'm going to go. And also something I've noticed when it comes to corals, I don't know if it's something that is scientific fact or not, but it seems like they encrust a lot faster when they're touching the rock work, meaning the live rock or whatever the real rock is in your tank. They seem like they encrust a lot better. So that's something that I've noticed from my time in the hobby, and I feel like it's true. I'm thinking it's more related to maybe the bacteria, maybe them being mounted to a live surface. So for anyone out there that has, elaborate frag systems and, farms or whatever the case may be, if you can confirm that for me, if there is a difference in encrusting speed and growth on a frag plug that is live, so to say, or cycled or cured, has a bacterial film on it, whatever the case may be, I'm really interested in knowing if that's true, because if it is, that's definitely something that would be great information for the hobby. But for me, we're going to roll with it for what I think is right and for what I think looks best in the JBJ. I did go ahead and kill the flow on the gyres because they were beating the corals up and blowing them off the rack. I wanted to keep these guys right below the water surface. I don't want them exposed to air for too long, even though exposing corals to air is not the end of the world. I mean, it's not going to completely kill them that quick, but I do want to try to reduce the stress. But the main thing is going to be getting this coral off of the frag plug. So I don't know if you guys can see this clearly or not, but it's fairly simple. Taking the bone cutters, and we're just gonna slowly edge it off at the base, and what do you know, popped right off the plug. Had a little super glue still on the bottom of it. We're good. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this guy cleaned up a little bit, and we should be good to go. So when it comes to adding the super glue, fairly simple. just put it on there liberally. This is the extra thick super glue gel, so like I said, it does not run. It's just gonna stay put. The main thing I found is gonna be the biggest tip with using super glue is letting it dry a little bit, letting it get tacky. So a way to help that is dipping it into salt water. When you dip the super glue in the salt water, the outside layer automatically forms a little skin and it starts drying. So that is not good enough to attach the coral to rock. The best thing I found to do is after this little skin has developed and a little bubble has formed with it, taking something and breaking that barrier is going to be the best way to get the coral to stick. So once you do that, then you don't have much time at all before you want to place this coral. So we're going to get this popped, and then we're going to go ahead and get this coral mounted in the place I want it. I've been eyeballing one particular spot for a nice bright piece of Setosa, and it's right here on the rock work. So once this guy grows in and becomes happy, he is going to encrust and completely fill in this area. You guys can see super glue is starting to kind of stick. You rub it. Once you start seeing it stick, then you can hold that coral in place. And then it's pretty much going to be good to go. So that guy stay there. Smush down the glue around them. Now I gotta admit, one of the most aggravating things with mounting SPS coral is accidentally knocking off something that was already glued. So that's gonna be an ongoing thing in the JBJ, and that's part of the reason I want to keep my hands out of the tank and keep anything else out of the tank that could knock a frag out, you know, before it ends up encrusting and really putting its base down and securing itself to the rock. So that's pretty much the goal. Get everything done in this one shot, and then hopefully, you know, none of the fish knock off frags, or none of the snails, or nothing else knocks off any of these corals before they can establish themselves. And this is also part of one of the reasons that I ended up adding all my livestock to the system first, because I knew that once I added SPS corals, the days of being the undefeated, undisputed fish catching champ are going to be over, because SPS frags and fish nets do not go well together. So at this point, all the fish are in the system are pretty much going to be in here for life, because I am not going to risk, you know, destroying all my SPS trying to catch a fish. So one thing I also want to mention, this time-lapse video really does not do justice to the amount of time it takes to mount all these corals. You're looking at definitely an hour and a half to 2 hours straight of just manual labor. Man, just getting things moved around, setting back, looking at the tank, making sure things are in the right place, making sure SPS corals are mounted in the right direction, because, you know, the direction they're facing is going to be the direction they first start growing. And I wanted to try to at least assist them not running into each other, and assist them maybe not running into the back wall, or whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, these corals are going to grow how they want to, but the initial install and the initial gluing is my only attempt of affecting that. So once I got all this done, then it was finally time for my normal post-maintenance bubble scrubbing of the tank. Any and every time I have arms in the tank, hands in the tank, any chance for, you know, soaps, lotions, colognes, anything that may have been on my skin to be transferred to the tank, I do a bubble scrub. My thought is, you know, the principles behind bubble scrubbing and how it attaches detritus and debris and everything else in the water. Hey, maybe it'll do that same thing for contaminants, especially stuff for me that was introduced to the tank. So I let this run for a couple hours or so after I put my hands in the system, and it normally, you know, results in the tank looking a lot better. So for those that don't bubble scrub, I advise you to kind of look up the science behind it. Tons of videos out there, but for me, it's just kind of sharing my normal process. And here we go, guys, the final result. You know, post bubble scrubbing, the next day, JBJ is looking crystal clear again, and even better, all 45 to 50 frags that are in the JBJ, and the ones I've mounted, the ones I've moved, all doing great. Now I'm still waiting on a few of them to open up like they was, but most importantly, some of the higher end stuff, the SPS corals, are doing fantastic in their new locations as well. So the next part of this video, I'm going to go a little more in depth as far as the layout of the JBJ, meaning some of the par numbers, some of the flow, and hopefully, give you guys a better idea of why I put certain corals in certain places and why certain parts of the rockscape are completely bare. You know, partly because I'm not sure what I'm going to put there, and another reason is I probably can't put anything there. So let's go ahead and get to it. So I'll give you guys a quick look at the par numbers and the JBJ. Now this is going to be with the lights running at 100% power on the Coral Labs AB Plus program, mounted at around 10 inches off the water line with just the 2 Radeon XR15s. A lot of you guys may have looked at the tank and automatically say, well, wait a minute, you know, that's definitely not the 500 or 600 par people are known to grow SPS in. And you're absolutely right. This is going to be all I can get from my 2 Radeon XR15s. Am I going to add a little more light later? Who knows? But at this point, this is definitely plenty of light to grow any and every coral I want to have in the system. You got to get out of the mind frame of thinking everything has to be a perfect number, and just think about how you can make things work with your numbers in your tank. So I'm going to focus my SPS in the higher par areas and use my LPS to fill in the other spots. So besides lighting, the next most important thing for me has to be the flow in the JBJ. You guys know corals, they completely rely on flow, especially SPS corals, bringing them food, taking their waste away. And this is also part of the reason that I have corals mounted a certain way in the JBJ. So for me, flow is going to be handled by my dual Gyre 330s and also my return pumps running the RFG nozzle attachment. So those are flow inductors that amplify the flow from my return pumps. And if you didn't notice, I mean, it's tons and tons of water movement along the top of the JBJ. So I'm trying to create that random flow and also create a flow pattern in the tank that will allow me to keep a mixed reef tank without blowing the tissue and polyps off LPS corals, and you know, being able to provide the amount of flow needed for the SPS corals. Is this the maximum amount of flow I want in the tank? Definitely not. I do see myself maybe adding flow later or making some adjustments, but for now the tank is pretty easy to identify. You know, you got the high flow areas across the top, which is going to be for your SPS corals, medium flow in the middle, you know, and the lower part of the tank is going to be where the less flow hits. Now I can change the patterns in the system. I'm still playing with it. You know, the standing wave gives me that downward spout in the middle, and then the 10-second pulses gives me that strong flow to move things. But I'm working on another pattern, a pattern that is going to allow me to, you know, mix and match and shoot downward spouts of water to take care of any and other dead spots in the system. So that's pretty much the two things I'm looking at. You know, try to mount corals in a certain way to where we can take advantage of the lighting and the flow. And so far, I think I got a pretty good plan. So besides lighting and flow, the last thing I consider is the type of corals that I'm mounting in the JBJ. It took me a while to figure this out when I first started the hobby, but a lot of corals can actually move that you don't really pay attention to. A lot of people assume that only anemones can actually move around the tank, but I quickly learned that corals like mushrooms and even zoanthids have the ability of detaching from where they are, you know, catching some flow in the tank, and ending up somewhere else completely separate than when you wanted them. So with all those things being kept in mind, that is why I wanted to add those corals first. That's why I added those zoanthids. That's why I added the anemones. That's why I added mushrooms. Added all those corals first, let those guys figure out where they wanted to be, and then I started mounting all the corals that would not move. Last thing I wanted to do was think I had something figured out and then have corals and anemones walking all over everything. So definitely something to make sure you consider whenever you're starting to add things for the first time to your system. So the main idea for this rock was to take advantage of all the different colors, like the Sunny D's and the brightness of the zoanthids. Let those guys completely fill in, have a very, very bright portion of the rock work. And then behind it, you know, you're easier to keep corals, your LPS, your Duncans. Those are going to grow huge, add tons of movement. And then last but not least, the Monties. I hope this thing plates out and gives me an awesome, you know, contrast between the Monties, the green, and then actually growing into that cave. I think that's going to look awesome. Now, as I mentioned before, you got to be careful adding anemones to your reef tank. And I've been lucky enough to have these guys isolated to their own rock, and they haven't moved. So this is going to be the anemone rock completely grown in with huge rose bubble tip anemones. And I also have some GSP growing on it. I think the contrast and the movement between these two types of corals is going to really, really look good in the JBJ. And I'm looking forward to this portion growing out. Now I'm really hoping that this green Monty plates out and does an awesome job of contrasting the red Monty on the opposite side. We'll see how that ends up growing out. You know, the meteor shower hopefully encrust that branch rock, gives me a nice contrast there. And then on the bottom of the taller branch rock up top, not really sure about this yet, but for now I do have some encrusting pieces there, some leptos and some Monties, because that area is really kind of a high, medium light, but really kind of a low flow area. And on top of that, I really don't like the idea of things competing with the look of that branch. That huge branch kind of looks like a large piece of SPS coral, and I don't think a bunch of branching like, you know, tort type corals is gonna look good, you know, competing with it. So I don't know what I'm gonna add there yet, but for now, I'm gonna keep some low profile corals. I may end up sneaking some LPS corals up there, who knows? But for now, this is gonna be the look I'm going for. I think it's gonna turn out okay. You know, I'm thinking about adding some 24K lepto to this as well. I think that bright yellow may actually look pretty good on that branch rock. So in either case, I'm gonna try to stay true to the scape, and I'm not gonna add anything that's gonna extend from that branch, only something that's gonna encrust on it. Now, when it comes to the right side of the tank, if you guys haven't noticed, done a lot of reconstruction on this side. Actually removed the large piece of rock that was there, had to bust it up a little bit, and I ended up with a small piece that looks pretty good, but I'm still wanting to surround this clam with something else. Meaning I'm probably gonna break up some rocks into some more smaller pieces of rubble and then put a bunch of xanthids or pallies or something on it. I really like the idea of seeing the clam, but not seeing the shell. You know, I was always the kind of guy that liked eating the head of the broccoli, but hating the stems. That's kind of the same with the clam. I just want to see the good parts and cover the bad with something a little more colorful, but also keeping in mind, I don't want to overcrowd or club this area too much. So for now, this is definitely gonna get the job done. Hopefully this clam, you know, settles in, keeps growing, keeps giving me, you know, a job that it's doing, giving me that blue color, you know, filtering my water and all that good stuff. So more to come on this. I consider this side still under construction. Now, if there was one portion of the JBJ I have not completely figured out yet, has to be this overhang right here. You know, up until this point, it's kind of been like a collection of corals, just the coral boneyard, if you want to call it that, of things I needed to mount. But for now, I decided to focus on the front portion of this overhang with some nice encrusting red Monty, and then the backside of it, not sure yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to make this some kind of maybe 8-can garden, or maybe fill this area in with some Euphilia that are, you know, pretty safe, meaning no torches, more of hammer or frog spawn type corals. Not really 100% sure. I just know the front portion of it is going to turn into a nice red encrusted, I believe that's some Christmas tree Monty, if I'm not mistaken, that's the name of it. But in either case, I think the front part is going to look awesome. It's just the back part that I have to figure out. So more to come on that. Also consider this a part of the JBJ that's under construction. When it comes to the swim throughs on the JBJ, I do my best to try to line the outside of these caves and these, you know, areas fish can pop in and out of without covering them up too much. So all the corals in this area are designed to kind of grow in and still allow fish to go through them. That's why I haven't put anything here like Monties or anything that's going to close this gap, and hopefully everything turns out that way. Now, there are some spaces that are left to be filled out that I'm probably going to fill in with some kind of encrusting corals, but the goal is to keep the integrity of the swim through intact and not limit flow through this area. Now, when it comes to the top of the JBJ, you know, the very large archways are always intended of putting SPS corals up here. You know, when you factor in the amount of light that this is getting and the amount of flow, high flow, high light equals SPS corals. No way I can put anything else up here and expect it to really survive and thrive like these corals should. Now, with that being said, there is one regret now that is more apparent than ever, is the height of the rockscape. If you look at how close these corals are to the output nozzles of the random flow generators, you can already see the potential for an issue with flow being too close. So I'm going to remedy that later down the line once that becomes a bigger problem. More than likely, I'm going to, you know, use some black PVC, route that flow downwards behind the scape and do some kind of homemade, you know, if you want to call it a undertow or underflow or whatever the case may be. I think there's a solution in place that I can handle for that. So for now, hey, we're just gonna let these corals enjoy all the flow all the lighting, and hopefully these things will reward me with growth and encrusting and, you know, turning into some nice little mini colonies. I'm not really expecting these things to grow into very, you know, 1 foot, 2 foot showpieces. I don't think that's going to happen in the JBJ. But if I can get these things to fill in the scape and fill in that space that I provided them, and hopefully, you know, not compete with each other. You know, the goal was to not pack the corals too tight. That's why this is the maximum amount of SPS I'm putting up here. These guys are spaced out, you know, 4 inches apart. Definitely plenty of room to grow in. And I'm not looking to, you know, sneak corals in between them. And I'm not looking to pack corals in any tighter. I just feel like have these guys spaced out the way they should be. Have them spaced out as far as the color and the potential growth pattern of them. And hopefully, you know, everything works out. So we'll see. This is going to be my second adventure into the SPS world. You know, in the 120 gallon, I was able to mount corals, had some corals encrusting. Like I said, that tank ended prematurely. This tank, the goal is to get these guys glued in, you know, got them mounted to the scape for the most part. Some that were on the plugs, that were encrusting the plugs, I left the plugs there. Everything else, got them on the scape, and with full intentions on just not touching them and let them do what they do. So for those that are SPS gurus out there, you guys can let me know what you think as far as my mounting, if this plan is going to work out. You know, I even tried to tilt them certain ways to hope, you know, that helps them grow in a certain direction. But ultimately, we're going to just let these corals do what they do. Now, I did discover a couple of potential problem areas, if you want to call it that, on the JBJ. It's going to be on both sides of the rockscape. I attempted to put some zoanthids down there to see if they would encrust and cover it up. I was unsuccessful. There just was not enough light to keep those things alive. And I'm not sure if there's any real coral I can put down there at this point. Maybe some soft corals or some leather corals or something. But for now, those bottom portions of the JBJ may end up just staying bare until I can find some low light corals, maybe some fabias or, you know, some kind of cyphestrea or maybe something that'll encrust. But for now, nothing I can think of to put down there. So if you guys got suggestions as far as very, very low light corals that aren't going to stick out too much, drop me a comment. So at this point, you guys should have a pretty good idea of the master plan for the JBJ. This is going to be a full-blown mixed reef tank with clear defined areas of where the SPS corals are going along the top, you know, and as far as the lower flow or indirect flow areas, I'm going to try to sneak some LPS corals in there. And then everywhere else is going to be the auxiliary corals, you know, some of the things that can help fill in space, that's going to grow in and not cause too much trouble, you know, like your Duncan corals or your pallies or zoanthids, you know, even the hammer coral is going to be okay. Not really sure where I can sneak in some, you know, dangerous sweeper type corals, maybe like some fabias or some torch corals. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to sneak them in here, but if I end up finding those corals becoming available, then I'll definitely find a place for them. But ultimately, you know, I have a great idea of where we're going to go with the JBJ. And now that things are mounted, I have an even better idea of how much room I have left, which honestly isn't a lot. You know, with me trying to stay disciplined and not completely pack it with so many frags to where it looks like it's full with frags, knowing that those corals are going to grow out, my goal is to try to let things breathe and have room to grow and just watch the tank fill in naturally, not completely packing it with so much stuff that, you know, I'm just kind of setting myself up for failure in the long run. You know, ultimately this tank is not going to be a 1 year tank. I'm going to keep this tank for some years, and I really want to master this tank, master the water quality, you know, actually grow me some mini colonies as far as the SPS, actually frag stuff, you know, give back to local hobbyists that have helped me out, and just, you know, keep doing what it do. So, you know, the ultimate goal of this tank is just to stay out of its way. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this semi-brief, not really brief at all, look at the JBJ and, you know, my plans as far as why I mount corals and how I do it. Hopefully this gave you some insight. And if you made it this far in the video, which is probably the longest video I've ever created, go ahead, give me a pound sign, keep doing what you do in the comments, and we're gonna roll on out. So as always, hey, you guys like, comment, subscribe. You guys keep doing what y'all do. Y'all be easy and happy reefing. Peace.